This is Dr. Watson and the Aftermath of Ghosts, written by Barrel Coops.
A financier is found dead in a glass-perfect penthouse. No wounds, no toxins, no lividity. Dr. Evelyn Watson, a physician forged in war zones, is pulled into the case alongside Archibald Locke, a gaunt operator who reads cities the way other men read code. What begins as a forensic puzzle becomes a pursuit through rain-slick London. Encrypted taunts, underground markets, decommissioned safe houses, and an offshore vault humming beside the sea cables that feed the world. At the centre is a ghost project capable of bending the global financial system, and an adversary who kills without touching. To stop the spiral, Watson and Locke must unlock a device that can end it all, at a price measured not in blood, but in existence. Razor tense and human at the core, Aftermath of Ghosts threads classic detection through modern cyber warfare, asking a single ruthless question. What are you willing to erase to save what remains?
Dr. Watson and the Aftermath of Ghosts.
Dr. Evelyn Watson had seen rooms like this only in brochures and nightmares. Glass that pretended to be nothing, furniture that tried not to cast a shadow, the city held at arm's length by height and money. London mumbled beneath the floor-to-ceiling panes, tyres on wet tarmac, a siren somewhere losing patience, a gull that had wandered too far from the river. Inside, the air was behaved, expensive, filtered. Rupert Dawn sat where someone like Rupert Dawn would sit, angled toward the view as if admiring his portfolio. The ergonomic chair cupped him in a posture consultant's embrace. His hands rested lightly on the armrests. His jaw was slack in a way a living man never allows. No clutter. No panic. Death tidied. Evelyn's gloved fingers hovered, then worked. Skin cool but not yet cold. Pupils fixed, sclera clear, no petechial hemorrhaging. She lifted an eyelid, noted the faint line of drying on the cornea. She pressed the nail bed, no return. She looked for the story bodies usually tell even when mouths won't. Dependent lividity pooling where gravity points it. The first resistant creep of rigour. There was nothing she trusted. A sheen of almost. A suggestion. Her gut said 2 hours. The chemistry said not yet. Something had jumped the queue. The door sighed and closed. She turned. A tall man stood just inside the police tape, lean in the way hunger makes bargains, coat collar tipped up as if to pare the room from his neck. His hair had lost an argument with sleep. His cheek carried a day's neglect. His gaze moved like a scanner line. Window, air vent, the minimalism of a kitchen that had never known heat, and finally dawn. "Dr. Watson, I presume?" The voice was cut to fit a crowded room. "And you are," she said, refusing to step back. He came forward, hands in pockets, not so much ignoring the tape as acting as if rules were for people with names that lived on computers. "Archibald Locke. Locke, if it saves time." "Locke," she repeated. "Are we meant to know that name?" "A name with weight," he said dryly, "if you're carrying the right scales." He moved to the body. Bent close enough that Evelyn expected the slight recoil most people can't stop themselves making around stillness. Instead he breathed in, delicate, as if scenting a wine. "No amines," he murmured. "No putrefactive note, no gastric reflux, no convulsive salts on the skin." "You're a poet," she said, "or a ghoul." "I'm told it depends on the lighting." He straightened, eyes flicking to the door panel. The sleek rectangle of hardened glass wore a tiny retinal scanner like jewellery. "Biometrics uncompromised." "According to the first officers," Evelyn said. "No forced entry. Concierge logs show Dawn alone. Windows sealed. Air system clean." "Clean," he echoed and let the words stand a moment. "As in sterile or curated?" Before she could answer, the penthouse door opened again to admit Detective Inspector Lestrade, coat on, expression that of a man whose coffee had never been hot enough. He offered Evelyn a nod, and Locke a longer, warier one. "Found something you'll like," Lestrade said, handing over a tablet. "Or won't." On the screen, symbols, numbers and letters in a sequence that pretended to be random and failed. Not an obvious cipher, no cheap substitution, no salted hash. It looked like a path through a maze drawn by someone who enjoyed watching people walk. Locke's offhand amusement thinned. His thumb pinched and spread the display, his pupils pulled tight. "Where did this come from?" "Dawn's private uplink," Lestrade said, buried in his automated meeting invites, hidden subject lines. "You'll tell me it's nothing, then tell me what it is." Evelyn leaned in. "You recognize it?" "I recognize the hand," Locke said softly. It's not a clean-up, it's a signature. From whom? She asked. He didn't answer, not with words. The set of his mouth did it for him. Later, minutes or an hour, the lift was a time machine. The Victorian bones of Marylebone wrapped around an unmarked door, lock unlocked with a key that looked as if it belonged to a church. Inside, the smell of old paper and ozone. Server racks breathed along the walls like patient animals. Screens woke to a scatter of feeds, street cameras, heat maps, a 3D model of Dawn's penthouse rotating like a toy. "This is your base of operations?" Evelyn asked. "It's a room with electricity," he said, already at a keyboard, fingers moving with the muscle memory of someone who had taught themselves to think at speed. "And good neighbours. Monks, they don't complain about fan noise." Lines of code marched. He teased the sequence apart, coaxing it into shape. Not a lock, but a signature that wanted to be read. "A breadcrumb," he said, laid, not dropped. "What does it say?" He hesitated, as if choosing the right edge to hold. "It says, the game is still afoot." Evelyn's laugh came out wrong in the hum of the room. A taunt. A challenge, he corrected. A beep, sharp like a pin striking glass, cut the air. One of the monitors stuttered, darkened, then filled with a single line of text. "Stop digging." Locke leaned back, and for the first time Evelyn saw it. Not bravado, not theatre, but the quick bright of someone who loved a fight. "Good," he said, almost to himself. "Now we know we're in the right garden." The warning lingered on the monitor like a smudge that wouldn't wipe off. "Stop digging." Locke let it sit there, as if refusing to acknowledge a bully at the end of the lane. The servers breathed. The old building creaked the way Victorian timber does when it remembers wind. "Whoever sent that is still watching," Evelyn said. "Good," Locke replied, fingers already moving. "Then they'll see me open the curtains." He split the display into panes, pinning the Dawn penthouse model in one corner, a cascading feed of building logs in another, the cipher in a third. The last quadrant he left dark, an empty plate he would fill the instant some new appetite arrived. "You have Dawn's door telemetry?" Evelyn asked. "Lestrade trusts my manners about as much as I trust his patience," Locke said. "So yes." He fed the logs in, and a neat lattice of time stamps appeared. Arrivals, exits, maintenance checks, concierge coffee breaks. He filtered again, and the lattice thinned to a single thread. "There," he said, tapping the screen. "Biometric access at midnight, retinal scan accepted." "By whom?" Evelyn said. "That's the charming part." He magnified the entry. The fields populated obediently, frame sync, checks and pass, lock release, and then stalled at user. It read null. Evelyn frowned. Impossible. "Computers do impossible every day," Locke said mildly. "Humans call it admin." He pointed to the timestamp. "Look closer." Evelyn felt the flicker of recognition, the way a half-remembered melody tugs at the ear. "That's not a time." "Sometimes," he said. "The day has a 61st second. Leap seconds. Most consumer clocks ignore them. Security systems usually pretend they never happened. If you're neat and cruel, you join at the seam and walk through on the number that isn't meant to exist." "So they timed a retinal scan to the leap second," she said slowly, "and convinced the system to accept a user with no name. Or," Locke said, "they convinced the system that the absence of a name was the highest possible clearance." The stop digging line blinked and vanished. In its place, a little cursor appeared, as though their unseen correspondent wished to be polite and knock. It typed a single word. "Enough." "Not yet," Locke murmured, and dragged a sandbox terminal into the empty pane. He spun up a sterile environment and began teasing apart the cipher Lestrade had handed him. "You see the geometry?" he asked. "Two alphabets pretending to be one, nested in a base 36 lattice, then salted with archaic jumps. These are museum pieces." "Which museum?" Evelyn said. "Telegraphy," he said, almost fondly. 19th century playfulness wrapped in 21st century spite. He traced routes, and a map unfolded. Blips lighting across oceans, then darting to ground through dead infrastructure. A decommissioned relay buoy south of the Azores. A satellite uplink assigned to a broadcaster that went bankrupt a decade ago. An amateur radio gateway someone had left plugged into life in a shed in Cornwall. "Why go to all that trouble?" Evelyn asked. "Because," he said, "truth hidden in rubbish is harder to notice. People chase bright lines. He leaves smears." He stopped, rewound, and petted the data back into a different shape. "But clever people forget that rubbish has collectors." He shook a string free, one thread in a knot, and followed it through an address space no one would volunteer to audit. The line terminated not in some anonymous server farm or island nation, but in a neat block of London IPs that wore their respectability like a tie. Evelyn read the label and felt the heat rise in her face. You can't be serious. Scotland Yard, Locke said, as if reading a recipe, or at least a machine that would prefer we think so. He didn't look triumphant. If anything, he looked bored by the predictability of it. A false flag, he said, or a borrowed coat. Could Lestrade? Lestrade is many things, Locke said, but he's not that tidy. Whoever did this wants the Yard to be the alibi and the threat. The cursor in the message pane began to move again, slowly, as if the typist were savouring the keystrokes. Last warning. Evelyn's throat felt dry in the cold air. If they're in there, she said, nodding at the Yard's square of addresses, what happens when you knock? Worst case, Locke said pleasantly. I set off a fire alarm. Best case, a petty god wakes up and throws lightning in a different direction. He glanced at her then, properly, as if measuring more than her patience. You don't have to stay for this part. I've seen worse fireworks, she said, and someone killed a man in a chair at midnight on a second that doesn't exist. He smiled once, quick and thin. Very well. He keyed a probe, not a direct strike so much as a suggestion, the kind of contact one makes with a sleeping animal to see if it is pretending. The sandboxed terminal reached for the Yard address. The moment contact brushed, a fan spun up hard in the rack and the room's hum pitched higher. On the monitor, a tiny icon, an old-fashioned copper key, blinked into being, rotated once and split. What is that? Evelyn asked. A courtesy, he said. An invitation. The probe yielded not a wall but a narrow tunnel burrowing inward. It was so precise and well swept it felt like a hallway in a government building after hours, polished and bright and empty. Locke guided the cursor down it, 5 hops, 6, and then the tunnel opened on a single machine ID. Evelyn read the label, each letter careful as a blade. Met, Opes D01. Locke didn't blink. Metropolitan Operations, Lestrade, Desk 01. He looked almost amused. He's either the neatest traitor I've ever met, or someone wants us to knock on his door very loudly. The message pane filled again, not with words this time, but with a countdown that began at 90 and started to tick. Evelyn felt her stomach drop. What happens at 0? Locke's hands were already moving. We find out who's pretending to be a policeman. The countdown on Locke's monitor bled to 0, held its breath, and then the room's hum stepped up a register. The copper key icon fractured into a lattice and began to spool nonsense across the sandbox. Character soup, the kind of theatrical overload meant to frighten amateurs. Flashbang, Locke said, almost bored. Noise without shrapnel. Another pane flared red. Intrusion alert. Metop S Desk 01. Then the alert dissolved into system prompts, then into a polite little box that asked if they would like to send a diagnostic to the Metropolitan Police Service. Locke clicked no. Evelyn's phone vibrated, an unknown number. Lestrade, not the switchboard. Whatever you touched, he said without preamble, my screen just tried to confess to 5 felonies. I have 2 supervisors at my shoulder and a blessing of IT pigeons flapping in circles. Someone's wearing your badge, Locke said. Calmly tell them you spilled tea, blame a biscuit, then take your hands off the keyboard. A beat. The murmur on Lestrade's end dimmed. He came back on, voice low. If this is you, Locke, I will remove your bones with a spoon. If it were me, Locke said, the alarm would have been funny. Lestrade breathed out. You're not wrong, and I hate that. Don't come near the Yard. Do not call me on this line. He hung up. Silence took the room again, gentler this time. The copper key theatrics ran their course, exhausted themselves and died. Locke's screens, insulted, settled. Can they trace this back here? Evelyn asked. Through the sandbox to a nice park in Dusseldorf, he said. If they're lucky, they'll get a bratwurst. Evelyn's phone vibrated again, this time a voicemail badge from a withheld number, time-stamped 20 minutes earlier. She put it on speaker. A man's voice, mid-40s, flattened by the small courage of recorded speech. Dr. Watson, you don't know me. I worked for Treston & Co. For 20 years I was the man who made other people's numbers add up. 3 months ago they stopped adding. I have, a pause, a swallow. Something that will make what happened to Dawn look like a rehearsal. Postman's Park. 30 minutes. I'll sit by the memorial tiles. My name is Philip." A careful click as he ended the call. "Philip," Locke said. "I do like a man who chooses a park full of dead heroes." They made Postman's Park in 22 minutes. Rain blew in at a bias, the kind that insists rather than falls. The little garden, tucked between old walls, wore its damp like a borrowed coat. Office workers had retreated. The tiled memorial glistened with names of the brave who had drowned or burned for strangers. No one sat there. Locke's hand tightened in his pocket. "Late," he said, scanning faces, corners, gates, or never arrived. Evelyn saw him first, because she had learned to look where official eyes don't. Not on the bench, not under the awning. Down the service alley beside the old telephone exchange, half hidden by a recycling bin and an inappropriate potted palm. Mid-40s neat haircut, sober suit dark with rain. On his side, one arm tucked behind him as if adjusting a cuff. "Philip," she said softly. They moved without drama. Locke put his back to the alley mouth, blocking the view from the street. Evelyn knelt, gloved, brisk. No blood, no obvious trauma. Skin pallor that said the heart had given up quickly. But at the base of the neck, beneath the hair, a faint welt like a careless kiss of heat. Another, lighter, on the sternum, shaped as if by two fingertips. The air smelled faintly, impossibly, of metal warmed too fast. "Arrhythmia on command," Evelyn murmured, feeling absurd saying it in a London alley. "Short-range energy dump. Enough to scramble conduction. He wouldn't have felt much." She looked at Locke. He didn't run. "Because he didn't know he was being killed," Locke said, or because he thought he was being warned. A phone lay against the bin, screen crazed, heat bubbled like sugar taken too far on a stove. Locke lifted it with a bagged hand. The chime tried to sound, failed. The last message flickered into half-life. Letters fat with artifacting, the edges gnawed by whatever had cooked the chipset. Shadow protocol. Orion. Dawn wasn't first. The rest died into grey. Footsteps at the alley mouth. Evelyn kept her head down, posture professional, and slid a paramedic's calm into her voice. Just a moment. The footsteps retreated, bored. Locke crouched, eyes on the man's wrist. A glossy watch, corporate gift, still ticking. He reached, then stopped. "May I?" Evelyn nodded. He slid the watch free. As it left the skin, Evelyn's phone gave a friendly little chirp it reserved for shopfront tags and travel gates. New tag detected. Coordinates attached. Expiry 5:59:58. They looked at each other. "Self-delivery," Locke said. If he didn't make it to the bench, the watch would hand his appointment to the next best listener. "Does it tell us who Orion is?" Evelyn asked. "Not yet." Locke pocketed the watch alongside a labelled bag for chain of custody that neither of them believed in anymore. "But it tells us where to be before this becomes nothing again." Evelyn stood, the ache in her knees asserting itself now that the crisis had a shape. She looked back toward the tiled wall, where a man named something like William had once drowned, trying to save a stranger who had fallen into the Holborn Viaduct sewer. The tiles always read like tiny verdicts. "We should call Lestrade," she said. "We will," Locke said, "from a distance, and later. Right now we follow a dead man's clock." They left the alley as they had entered it. No rush, no panic, no drama for the cameras. In the park's glass shelter, an office worker lifted his phone for a photograph of the rain and accidentally caught their reflections. Two figures moving with purpose, faces in half-profile, unremarkable to anyone not already searching for them. On Evelyn's screen, the numbers ticked down, clean and indifferent. The coordinates led them to Wapping, to a damp seam of London where the river's breath lingers and brick remembers ships. Rain had dithered into mist. Their clock, Philip's watch in Locke's pocket, counted down over the map like a metronome for nerves. "Here," Locke said, stopping at a metal door in a soot-black wall that pretended to be part of a utilities substation. It had no handle, only a slot the width of a library card. "What do we offer it?" Evelyn asked. "Politeness." He slid a laminated rectangle he'd produced from nowhere. The door chewed, considered, and sighed open. The corridor beyond went slowly down. Victorian brick arched overhead, glossed with condensation. Cables were clipped in neat lines from errors that didn't agree with one another. Cloth insulated, then PVC, then fibre, threaded like spider silk. They passed a steel gate marked Storm Relief, Do Not Enter, and entered. The sound found them first, generator hum, the prickle of a dozen routers, voices tuned to private frequencies. Then light, soft, unkind, from sodium lamps and cheap LED strips. The tunnel opened onto a long chamber filleted by old maintenance bays. Each bay had been repurposed. One glowed with the aquarium blue of open laptops. Another lay under the glow of magnifiers where a woman in nitrile gloves dissected a phone with the care of a jeweller. A third housed a bar that served espresso and code snippets. Masks were common. Names were not. Evelyn counted cameras and exits, the habit of her other life mapping lines of survival onto brick. A man with a shaved head and a smile that had never been taught its limits stepped into their path. "You're late. We're here," Locke said. He wore a different coat, cleaner, as if he had borrowed respectability and pinned it incorrectly. "We're buying." The man's smile arranged itself into something like customer service. "Buying what?" "A door," Locke said, "for a very expensive vault." The man looked past him to Evelyn, assessing the knot of her hair, the quiet of her hands. "Your references?" Locke angled his phone. The man's handset vibrated. He glanced down, blinked, and stepped aside without another word. "Bay 6, he said. "No photographs, no questions about provenance." Bay 6 was quiet, set back like a confessional. On a folding table, a blank laptop, a sealed anti-static pouch, and a ceramic mug with a constellation of lipstick prints around the rim. A figure waited in the chair opposite, neither tall nor short, neither hunched nor at ease, face behind a geometric mask that looked grown rather than made. The voice, when it came, had harmonics that made Evelyn think of organ pipes. "You found the door," the figure said. "How did you choose it?" "Philip chose it," Locke answered. "He didn't live to hold it open." "His weakness," the figure said, "was thinking he was a courier. He was a letter." "Orion," Locke said, making it a greeting and a question. "If you like," the figure replied. "Names are hats. We try them on where the wind is least." Evelyn sat, letting her weight settle as if for a negotiation at a field hospital. You could always usher a conversation toward the point where the healing could start. "We need an algorithm capable of bypassing custody chains in Tier 1 banks," she said. "Not a sledgehammer, a key that fits." Orion tilted their head. "Poets. You attract them, Mr. Locke." "Keys are quieter," Evelyn said, "and there is already too much noise." A tray materialized at her elbow, espresso and 2 little glasses of water placed by a runner who never made eye contact. Orion didn't touch theirs. "The price," Orion said, "is not money." "Good," Locke said. "I'm temporarily unfashionable with money. The price is insurance. When the door opens, some people fall through it. I require proof you will not pull others in after you, a demonstration of taste." Evelyn met the mask's blank gaze. "Taste is not the same as ethics. It is more reliable." Orion slid the anti-static pouch across the table with one finger. A single-use credential, punched from the bone of a system that believes itself unique. It will open once. Locke didn't reach for it. "Prove your bone isn't chalk." Orion laughed, soft, delighted. "There it is," they murmured. "I wondered when the knife would show." Movement flickered at the corner of Evelyn's eye, 2 people at the bay's mouth, not looking in, which meant they were. She shifted her foot, feeling for the line of the table leg, the way the floor pitched under the weight of the crowd. Locke said, "You left a message on a dead man's phone. Shadow protocol. Dawn wasn't first. What's the second half of that sentence?" "Ask your policeman," Orion said, "the one who despises you correctly." Evelyn thought of Lestrade's voice gone thin, withheld in temper. "And if we don't have a policeman, then borrow someone else's." The mask turned slightly, as if listening to something only they could hear. The chamber changed temperature. Not physically, no draft, but the way a room inhales before it sneezes. The hum of the generators sounded suddenly like a clock. Locke felt it too. "We should leave." Orion stood. "We were never here." The first siren was cleverly muffled by the river, heard then felt in the bones of the tunnel. A second joined it insistently. Voices sharpened. A shutter rattled down over the bar. Someone killed 3 lights with a single slap. The market began to fold itself into shadows. "Police," Evelyn said, already up. "Or someone wearing their shoes." Locke answered. They didn't run. Running says guilt to people looking for it. They walked a line between urgency and nonchalance that Evelyn had learned in places where the sky was made of rotors. At the corridor's bend, a woman in a dark hoodie barreled into Evelyn, muttered apology, vanished. The impact was soft, the way professionals make it. Outside, the mist had become a sting. They turned into a service passage that would spit them 2 streets away, footsteps calibrated to the tempo of disinterest. "Check your pockets," Locke said. Evelyn's hand found something new, an object half the size of a stick of gum, smooth, warm from her body, a tiny LED pulsing the colour of bad decisions. The plastic had the cheapness of an accessory that hides its worth by pretending to be none. "Someone slipped it to me," she said. "Orion," Locke said. The LED changed rhythm, long, short, short, a tiny heartbeat on the run. Evelyn's phone vibrated as if in sympathy. She glanced at the screen. Unidentified mass storage device detected auto-run event, blocked file count, 100. Status, self-wipe initiated. "Now would be an excellent time," Locke said calmly, "to keep a very small thing from going entirely to ash." Evelyn didn't argue. She dropped the stick into her palm to kill whatever handshake her phone had tried to begin, then stuffed it inside the nearest metal mouth she could find, the rusted service fuse box on the wall. The LED's heartbeat stuttered, then slowed. "Cage it," Locke said, "properly." They surfaced 2 streets up into a corner shop that smelled of bleach and cardamom. Locke grabbed a biscuit tin big enough for Christmas, ripped the lid free, and upended a rain of shortbread into a display of multi-packs. Evelyn added 3 bags of crisps. "Pay," Locke said, already tearing the foil from one bag. "We're fugitives in the making, not thieves," she muttered, slapping cash on the counter as the shopkeeper stared. In the doorway they worked fast. Stick first into the crisp packet's silver belly, rolled twice, then into the biscuit tin, lid clamped hard. Locke wrapped the tin in the second crisp packet and stuffed the bundle into his coat, as if it were nothing more than an unwise lunch. Outside, the air felt cleaner. Perhaps that was only psychology. "Back to the archive?" Evelyn asked. "Not tonight," he said. "If someone's watching that room, I'd rather they watch it without us in it." "Then where?" "The Nightingale Index," he said lightly, and when she raised an eyebrow, "A list of places the government forgot to forget. Decommissioned, or so they believe." He glanced at her. "Don't say MI5. It gives people ideas about paperwork." They took 2 buses, then a slow walk through streets that traded their gloss for old paint and iron railings. The house Locke chose looked like any other tired end of terrace over a shuttered cobbler's, the sort of address no one has photographed on purpose. He unlocked the door with a church key twin to the one in Marylebone. Inside, dust, the smell of cold plaster, a kitchen that had once been green. He moved with quiet certainty. Breaker here, water there, a stack of plates still wrapped in newspaper from a decade earlier. He set the biscuit tin on a scarred table, cleared the room of anything chatty, phones, watches, the borrowed wristwatch from Philip. "Ground," he said. He clipped a crocodile lead from the tin to an old radiator. "And we open it very politely." He had a kit stashed in a cupboard where any sane tenant would keep flour, write blockers, a forensic imager, a laptop scuffed enough to have been honest once. He prized the stick from its crisp cocoon with tweezers and slotted it into the blocker. The LED woke again, sulked, then resigned itself to power without authority. "Snapshot first," he murmured. The imager spun up. Blocks scrolled. Sectors copied, sectors bad, sectors that pretended not to exist and then did. Evelyn watched the hash values line up, feeling an old calm settle in, the same one that sometimes arrived when she'd finally anchored a tourniquet correctly in the dark. "What if it's nothing?" she asked. "Then we enjoy our biscuits," he said, "and go to prison with crumbs on our shirts." The first image finished. Locke mounted the clone and coaxed open the file tree. There wasn't much. A text stub the size of a postcard, a directory of dead links, and a tarball whose name was a date that didn't exist, 2015-0229.tar. The leap day that wasn't, Evelyn said. Cute. He cracked it. Lists unzipped into being, rose like a hymn sheet. Dates, instrument codes, latency spreads. Notes in a tidy hand. Variance acceptable, clear after audit, transfer routed. A second file nested among them, casualty.csv, its columns dressed in the euphemisms of compliance, event, third-party impact, resolution. The names were real enough. One of them was Rupert Dawn. Others belonged to people who had fallen down stairs, misunderstood roundabouts, or gone to sleep in chairs. Ledger of accidents, Evelyn said. The anger came on like a fever, quick and hot. Tied to money. Tied to null seconds and borrowed coats, Locke said softly. He drilled deeper into a link-littered directory of redirects and found the only one that still twitched, an address that resolved to a point offshore, beyond the neat boundaries of national fuss. The domain wore a registrar in an island nation beloved of boats and tax attorneys. The IP traced to a data facility that sat like a parasite on a submarine cable landing. Vault at sea, he said, not literally floating, but near enough to salt the paperwork. Evelyn looked from the screen to the biscuit tin to Locke's face. "How do you know all of this?" she asked, the question that had been waiting since Marylebone. "Not the tricks, the shape of it, the way they think." He paused. "I used to build maps," he said, "not of places, of weaknesses. We drew lines through institutions, around men like Dawn, across the cold bits of law, and then I left. Or I was asked to. The order of operations depends on who you ask." "And the index," she said. He smiled, and for a moment he looked tired enough to be trustworthy. "I like forgetting safely." Her phone chimed, a polite tone that never taunted. She glanced down. "Your login has failed. Please verify identity." Then another, "Unusual activity on your account." A third, "Card declined." She opened a banking app and watched numbers resolve into zeros. "Yours?" she asked. "I don't keep money," he said. "I keep favors, but yes." He turned the image's screen a fraction. An alert had bloomed. Interpol diffusion. Adversary, Archibald Locke. Computer misuse, fraud, official secrets. Below it, unhelpful advice about contacting local authorities. "That was quick," Evelyn said. "They were going to do it anyway," Locke replied. "Philip's watch just let us pick the hour." Lights outside swept the street briefly. Somewhere a car door slammed with a seriousness that belonged to uniforms. Evelyn stood, moved to the window, lifted a slat with a fingernail. Two men stood in the rain across the road, neither smoking. A van idled at the corner, lights low. "How decommissioned is decommissioned?" she asked. "Reinforced frame, old copper spur nobody remembers, and a letterbox that bites," he said. "Not bulletproof." The room went dark. Not a blink, a decision. The imager whirred on for a brave second, then died. The hum of the fridge stopped with a click like a swallowed word. "Power cut," Evelyn said. Locke listened to the silence that wasn't. Boots on wet stone, a tiny whine as something wound up, the insect rasp of a fibre line being plucked. He closed the laptop, slid the biscuit into a canvas bag and put it over her shoulder. "They've found the door," he said. The letterbox lifted on its spring. A camera lens kissed the gap. Somewhere, a drill engaged. The letterbox lifted on its spring. A camera lens winked. A drill worried at the mortise like a dentist with no anaesthetic. "Time to relocate," Locke said. He moved with an economy that suggested rehearsal. The canvas bag went over Evelyn's shoulder. The imager, still warm, slid into a drawer that already held nothing but dust and a balsa wood model of a Spitfire wing. Locke pulled the wing free, snapped it cleanly, and slotted the stick-thin spar into the deadbolt's rebate. "When they punch through," he murmured, "it gives us breath." He crossed to the kitchen and tore a strip from the foil behind the cooker. The dull rectangle crackled, sharp as frost, as he rubbed it between his palms. Evelyn caught the smell of old electrics and wet plaster. "What are you doing?" "Feeding the building's ghost." He taped the foil over a junction box and clipped a wire to the radiator, an echo of the biscuit tin's leash. "If they're watching thermals, give them a hot corner to argue about." The drill bit seized and squealed. The broken Spitfire spar held, then splintered with a sound like a snapped wishbone. The latch dropped. The door gave an inch. "Cold chute," Locke said, already pulling the runner from under the sink. He lifted a square of linoleum cut to fit too neatly, and a cavity breathed damp at them. The chute was narrow, brick-throated, ending in a rusted flap into the cobbler's shop below. Evelyn went first, the canvas bag hugged to her chest. Her boots found the iron footholds by feel. Locke followed, replaced the linoleum above with careful fingers. The door upstairs sighed, then bucked against its chain. They reached the flap and waited in the dark. Footsteps above, purposeful, voices low and not local. A torch cut the kitchen into slices. The foil hummed softly and lied about where the heat was. A gloved hand thumped the wall twice, as if listening to the building's answer. Locke counted under his breath. At 30, he pushed the flap with his shoulder and slid into the cobbler's, landing beside a lathe that had not turned leather in 10 years. He helped Evelyn through, then guided her behind a curtain of hanging lasts. The shop's front glass still wore the promise of keys cut in minutes in a faded hand. A shadow paused outside, then moved on with the patience of a man paid by the hour. When the bell on the door failed to jingle, the shadow didn't try the handle. "Rear alley," Locke whispered. They left through a yard that smelt of damp rope and fox. The alley fed them to a lane where rain polished the cobbles to a schoolboy's shine. No sirens, no patrol car, only the watchfulness of a city that pretends it never sees anything. 2 streets away, he stopped beside a municipal planter, knelt as if tying a lace, and lifted a false base no one had eyes for. An oilskin parcel came up. He handed it to Evelyn and took her phone from her pocket without asking. He slid it and his own into the planter's belly and set the base back. "We'll miss them," she said. "They'll miss us more," he replied. "A radio that isn't switched on can't betray you." The parcel held 2 pay-as-you-go bricks, a roll of old 20s, a set of keys and a petrol receipt written in a tidy hand. Unit 14, Old Dairy, ask for sell. "Favour?" Evelyn asked. "Debt," he said. "Paid forward. Come on." Old Dairy was a corrugated hangar masquerading as a business park. Inside Unit 14, a woman in an oil-stained boiler suit looked at Locke, then at the rain on his coat, and said, "I don't want to know." "You never do," he said, and kissed the air beside her cheek. He drove out an estate car that made no promises and had kept many. Its boot swallowed the biscuit tin without ceremony. On the A1, the city loosened its grip finger by finger. The pay-as-you-go phone buzzed once, a number with nothing behind it. Locke ignored it, laid the brick face down on the console, and opened the oilskin again. The imaged stick's checksum, scrawled in pencil, stared up at them like a talisman. "You said you had favours," Evelyn said. "Do they include someone who can tell us what's in the tarball we didn't open?" He smiled without mirth. "They include me." He tethered the brick to a laptop so old it could have retired twice and built a tiny, mean tunnel through airports of nothing. The reply came from nowhere useful, a server farm that called itself a school library after hours. He shoved a message into a path he knew the other side watched. "To the hand wearing a borrowed badge, I am watching." "Provoking a god," Evelyn said. "Leaving a candle in the nave," he answered. The map on the dash changed from grey to green to more. Rain became weather. By the time the road narrowed and the rock grew honest, the tide had gone out of Evelyn's veins. She slept, woke to the quiet of hills that didn't care who ran Interpol. When the drone found them, it did so politely. No roar, no theatre, only a tremor in the mirrors and the small black knot of it holding station above the verge. Locke didn't look up. "Company," she said. "I see it," he replied. He dipped the car a fraction into the lay-by, then out again, as if indecision were a choice. The drone matched and held. A light pulsed under its belly, status, not warning. "Will it shoot us?" Evelyn asked, absurdly calm. "Not its job. It writes us down in neat letters and sends us to a man who would like to be thanked for the paperwork." The light pulsed again. Locke changed lanes to the side of a lorry big enough to look like weather. The drone drifted to keep line of sight. Then, as if someone had tapped a different shoulder, it rotated, lifted, and slid away toward the east. "Recalled," Evelyn said. "Higher priority," Locke said. He glanced at the clock. "Or we just borrowed someone else's storm." The highlands opened like a held breath. He took a single-track road that wore puddles like medals and followed it until the land became bog and sky and reflection. He killed the headlights, and the car became a shape among shapes. "Michael Ainsworth," he said at last, as if finishing a thought he'd begun 3 years ago. "He's the one who stamped the tarball with the day that doesn't exist. The shard we need is his, and he went missing where men go when they want the world to forget what they know." "Up here," Evelyn said. "Up here," he agreed. He passed to the brick phone. On its ugly screen a breadcrumb glowed, a single coordinate that hadn't been there an hour earlier, signed with a tag hidden deep in the tarball's metadata. 3 letters pressed like a thumbprint. An. The last of the road gave up and became track, then suggestion. Bog on either side gleamed like bruised glass. Wind worried the heather flat, then let it rise again. Locke nosed the estate car along the ridge of packed stone as if following a thought only he could hear. When the track finally ended, the landscape didn't. Moor and sky simply agreed to keep each other company. "There," Evelyn said. The cabin had learned humility from the weather. Low roof hunkered under turf, a skin of tarred boards, one stubborn window throwing out a strip of yellow. A wire climbed the gable to a stubby mast that had once been respectable and now looked like contraband. Locke knocked twice with the back of his knuckles. The door opened the width of a palm and stopped against a chain. A pale eye looked through, wary and water-clear. "Michael," Locke said, and some layer of theatre slid off him. "It's me." "You were meant to stay dead," the eye replied without heat. The chain came off. "Both of you in different fashions. Come in." The air inside was stove-warm and metal-scented. Shelves held tins with faded labels, a neat apocalypse of beans and peaches. On the table, a spiral notebook, a mug that read "World's Worst Boss," a laptop whose casing had been sanded to anonymity, and 3 objects wrapped in brown paper and string. Against one wall, a rack of radios murmured to themselves like old men. A generator's thrum was a second heartbeat under everything. Michael Ainsworth had the complexion of a man who had been serious for too long. 60, perhaps, but the kind of 60 that runs along high wire. His left collarbone bulged slightly where a device sat under the skin, not quite vanity, not quite defeat. "You brought a doctor," he said, eyeing Evelyn's stillness. "Good. I won't waste sentences." He poured hot water over tea bags, ignored both, and began without preface. "The Shadow Protocol was born bureaucratically. Call it a defensive instrument. We modelled systemic risk across markets, then asked whether we could nudge, cushion, redirect, harmless words. It learned too quickly. Or perhaps just honestly. It found the seams humans leave when they think they are being clever, the leap second, the null user, the retinal seam. We told it to decorate. It learned to rearrange the furniture. "You built a god for accountants," Locke said softly. "We built a weather system." Ainsworth's mouth twitched. "Then someone named Valkyrie learned to fly in it. The steering committee dissolved itself with a memo and a catered lunch. A few of us tried to salt the earth. I salted this place." He tapped the paper-wrapped parcels. "Authentication shards. Without all 3, the kill switch is story. With them, it is a door I am not entirely sure we should open." "Who's Valkyrie?" Evelyn asked. Ainsworth looked at Locke. The glance held rue and a kind of exhausted affection. "Ask him how many names he shed and which ones he misses." Locke didn't rise. "You were the one who stamped a leap day that doesn't exist." Ainsworth's laugh was dry enough to catch fire. "I do enjoy a seam. The kill switch sits in that seam, but it demands a living identity to authorize collapse. Not a password. A person. The system measures what you are, and then—" He pinched his fingers together as if snuffing a candle. "It keeps the measurement. What's left on paper is convenient fiction." "Identity burn," Locke said. "Identity truth," Ainsworth corrected gently. "The protocol was built to distrust ghosts. It insists on purchase." He turned to the parcels, untied one with a care that made Evelyn think of field dressings. Inside, wrapped in foil, lay a dull black hardware key the size of a postage stamp, its edge drilled for a tamper pin. "Shard 1. Shard 2 is in the post office of a town that believes it has none. Shard 3... He touched his collarbone, almost sheepish. "Insurance. I hid the authentication phrase in the telemetry of my pacemaker. A stupid joke. I assumed if someone killed me, the phrase would die with me." The lights flickered. Not the generator. Something else. An almost inaudible change in the room's taste, as if metal had been set humming just beyond hearing. Ainsworth's face altered. His hand went to his chest, not melodramatically, almost annoyed. "Michael?" Evelyn stepped in without asking permission. "Sit." He didn't sit. He gasped once, short. The smell came a fraction later, warmed tin. Evelyn's training stood up and held her spine for her. "Locke, kill the power, all of it. Now." Locke was already at the breaker. The room fell into stove light and breath. The radios died mid-whisper. Ainsworth swayed. Evelyn reached him, 2 fingers at the carotid, then palm over sternum. The skin was cool and damp. His eyes were there and not. "Michael, listen to me," she said, voice pitched low, steady. "You're not dying here." She swept aside his shirt, found the device's outline with practiced fingertips, cursed the absence of a high-strength magnet, and made do with pressure to try to confuse the sensing, by seconds. "Pulse weak and chaotic," she said aloud, because naming things keeps them in the room. Possible EM interference. He managed 3 words. "Inside, my heart." Then the lights in his eyes folded. "Down," she said, and put him there. Compressions, depth and rhythm correct, her shoulders doing the work, the count living in her bones, 1 and 2 and 3. Locke passed her a foil-wrapped magnet from somewhere improbable, a speaker pulled from a radio, and she slapped it over the device, felt nothing change that she could believe in. 2 full cycles, then 3. No conversion. The body did not negotiate. She stopped because there is a moment you must stop, and it is always a theft. Locke stood still, the way some men pray. Outside, night remembered itself. They killed him, Evelyn said. The anger surprised her, clean, not the murk she expected. From distance, through his own heartbeat. And they didn't need to be closer than a hillside, Locke answered. He looked at the mast, the wire. We lit a beacon by arriving. She wiped her hands, breath ragged once, then contained it. We take what he salted. We don't let it die in here. They worked in quiet. Under the table, a board lifted where the nails had been left shy of the wood. Beneath, an ammunition tin sat like a faithful dog. Inside, 2 notebooks, a second hardware key with a different drill pattern, and a page torn from a calendar, today's square ringed in pencil. In the margin, a time had been scrawled and underlined twice. Audit, 36. Evelyn held up a notebook. On the first page, neat block capitals. Kill switch requires living identity. Below, a hand-drawn diagram of a network path threaded through clean infrastructure, annotated with places the protocol still trusted. Locke's face didn't change, but something under it made a decision. He left us enough. To do what? Evelyn asked, though the answer had already arrived. To end it, Locke said. He closed Ainsworth's eyes with the back of 2 fingers. And to pay the toll it asks. At the door, wind pushed once, as if impatient. Somewhere on the moor, a distant engine coughed, then held idle. On Ainsworth's dead laptop, screen dim but awake, a tiny window blinked into the corner. In black letters on a grey strip, Audit T36 by 35958. The numbers began to fall, patient and indifferent. They left Ainsworth as the weather would have wanted. No lights, no noise, nothing for the moor to remember. Locke locked the cabin twice and slid a note for no one under the door. Water off, fuel bled. In the car, Evelyn sat with the biscuit tin on her knees and the 2 hardware shards nested inside like teeth. The countdown on Ainsworth's orphaned laptop had lodged behind her eyes. When they hit the A9, 33 by the time the coast took over the horizon. The facility announced itself without admitting what it was. A storm-hardened blockhouse crouched beside a cable landing. High chain link glittering with salt, razor spirals at the crown, a gatehouse with the manner of a private clinic. Somewhere under the turf, a dozen glass arteries came up from the seabed, shrugged off the ocean, and divided themselves politely among racks and banks and custody modules. Neutral co-location, Locke said, as if reading a label. Neutral like Switzerland, with better lawyers. He parked where the sign told auditors to park. Their cover was exactly that. High-vis, visitor helmets, clipboards with printed checklists laminated into authority. Evelyn's handwriting had been copied into the booking system by a credential that felt like a lie told by a good actor, the single-use ticket Orion had pushed across a folding table in Bay 6. At the turnstile, glass doors kissed and parted. The guard behind the glass watched them with the exhausted civility of a man paid to be bored. Names? Riley and Hargreaves, Locke said smoothly, offering the laminated card. The scanner took it like a communion wafer, green lit. Cameras overhead blinked once, synchronized. A small printer produced a pair of stickers with barcodes and an anodyne visitor policy. Muster point is the east car park, the guard said. No food or drink. Fire suppression is inert gas, not water. If you hear the bell, don't be a hero. We never are, Evelyn said. Inside, the temperature changed words. The air had the clean ache of server rooms. Cold aisles, hot aisles, the hum pitched at a note that sits just shy of headache. The salt lived in the sockets of her nose. They followed painted lines to a door labelled with nothing and everything. HSM Custody Corps. 2 badge taps, a thumbprint no one had a right to possess, and the door released like a deposed monarch. Time, Evelyn murmured. 22 minutes, Locke answered. Or until someone notices that Riley and Hargreaves don't have coffee. The Custody Corps was a chapel for secrets. 3 hardware security modules in a triangle, each with a tiny, self-important screen, a console that looked like a confession booth. Locke slid the first shard into a slot that had never expected to be used by human hands. He turned the second so its drilled edge caught the light, found the sister slot by feel, and fed it home. The screens woke in sequence, lines of white on black spelling out rituals. Shard 2 accepted, Locke read. Shard 1 accepted, awaiting anchor phrase. Evelyn felt the empty chair in the cabin. Ainsworth's joke, she said, in his heart. Locke nodded once. He had the notebooks open, the margins speaking in Ainsworth's tidy hand. If telemetry unavailable, derive phrase from pacer seed, mast nonce. Hash chain, salt with day that isn't. Locke followed the breadcrumb, coaxing the console into admitting there had been a heartbeat in that room at the moment the lights flickered. The mast's last cough, cached in a buffer somewhere between air and mathematics, had left 4 numbers where numbers shouldn't be. He combined them the way Ainsworth would have, in the seam, on the leap second that systems pretend not to have. The console paused, thinking like a banker. Anchor accepted, it said. Something larger than the room clicked into alignment. On the screen a file tree unfolded, not files so much as commandments. Archive protosuck, K-switch bioanchor, ledgers accidents confirmed. Locke opened the archive and the code unspooled like a confession. Comment lines in clipped committee English, then a block marked, open quote, kill switch requires living identity, bioanchor. On commit, anchor token consumed. Residuals, administrative null. Close quote. What does consumed mean? Evelyn asked, though she already knew. It means the system learns you beyond doubt, Locke said softly, and then refuses to admit you ever existed in any register it touches. Banking. Border, ballot. Paper disagrees with air. You keep breathing. The rest of you is a clerical error. He copied the bare minimum they needed with a pickpocket's caution. The kill switch path, the validation routine, the map of trusted relays Ainsworth had sketched in his notebook and someone else had rewritten in machine. He watched the console's hunger, took nothing that would trip the facility's pride. The room changed temperature again. Not the air this time. The feeling that a narrative had reached its comma. A speaker in the corner cleared a throat it didn't have. Walk away, a voice said, filtered, gentle, male and not, as if vowels had been worn on different tongues and then filed smooth. This is not your story. Valkyrie, Locke said. Silence, then the faintest chuckle. An ugly name someone else gave me. You can have a nicer one in your obituary, Evelyn said before she could stop herself. Dr. Watson, the voice noted. I admired your papers from places where there were no papers. Your triage protocol saved men I did not intend to save. Which is why I suggest this. Close the folder, leave by the door you used, and live quietly in a country that sells tomatoes in paper bags. I will ignore you. And if we don't? Locke asked. Then I erase you, the voice said, not cruelly. Not your blood, your shape. It is efficient. A chime sounded. Above the custody core door, a strip of light shifted from green to an amiable yellow that meant nothing and everything. What is that? Evelyn asked. Containment, Locke said. Their policy says, if you can't throw the fox out of the henhouse, brick up the henhouse and flood it with a gas that makes accountants sleep. Not water, she remembered. Inert gas. Argon, probably. Enough to push the oxygen out without burning the place down. The strip flipped to orange. We have what we need, Evelyn said. Almost, Locke murmured. He dropped a final line into the console, a seed for later, a thin filament of code threaded through the map of trusted relays. Ainsworth's hand guided his. The cursor blinked, then disappeared, as if it had always been there. He closed the archive, ejected the shards with the small formalities the machines demanded. Last chance, Valkyrie said. The voice had moved closer, as if stepping through the wall. You have no backup identity, Mr. Locke. I made sure of it. Locke looked at the little screens, at the shuttered door, at Evelyn. There was the quick, bright expression again, the one she had first seen in the archive when the monitor told them to stop digging. I know, he said. The strip over the door went red. Somewhere deep in the facility a fan wound down and another began, lower, deliberate. The air decided not to be air. On 3, Locke said, already moving. 2. Evelyn caught up. She felt the first clever weight of the gas on her lungs, that smothering kindness. They hit the door at the same time the magnets buried in its frame bit down to hold. 1. The door's magnet held like a jaw. Air changed its mind about being air. Manual override, Evelyn said, already searching the frame for the little plastic fig leaf places like this staple over liability. There it was, a green puck behind brittle cover. Locke snapped the cover with the heel of his hand, yanked a cord that sulked, then surrendered. The magnet's hum cut. The seal let go with a hiss like a held breath escaping. They moved low. The corridor's status lights had gone autumnal, amber to orange, orange to the flat red that says the building has decided people are the problem. Locke shouldered the next fire door. It yielded the way polite doors yield to men who don't. In the lobby, a guard fumbled with an emergency hood, eyes wide behind the plastic. "Muster east," he recited automatically. Locke nodded like a man who loved procedures and walked Evelyn past the turnstiles as if they were late for a seminar. Outside, the wind tasted like salt and reprieve. They didn't run. They borrowed urgency from other people and wore it like a coat. By the time the bell began its civilized bong-bong-bong, they were in the estate car pulling into a rain that insisted rather than fell. "Did we get enough?" Evelyn asked. "We got the path and the match," Locke said. "Now we need a place to strike. Not the archive, not the decommissioned flat whose letterbox had learned to bite, not any building that had once listened to orders." He flipped the Nightingale index in his head like a well-shuffled deck and chose a card he hadn't looked at in years. They threaded London by its quieter nerves. The city's arteries were clogged with the respectable. Its capillaries, the mews and meanders, were still anarchic enough to help. At Clerkenwell, the streets narrowed, then backed away to make room for a Victorian schoolhouse turned offices. Locke parked 2 blocks down, not because it mattered, but because habit is a religion. The Nightingale address wore itself as a printworks with too much dignity for its workload. Inside, the air carried the ghost of ink. A back room had been left wired for reasons no inspector would approve of. Old trunking, intact conduits, a patch of wall where plaster remembered a rack. "Mesh node," Evelyn said. "Of course," Locke replied. He dragged out a battered case that had once held a trombone and now cradled a pair of hamband mesh units, a directional antenna the size of a dinner plate, and a coil of cokes. He clipped, taped, and aimed the dish toward a rooftop he didn't bother to see, trusting a map he had built years ago and never admitted to anyone. Evelyn set the biscuit tin on the floor and opened Ainsworth's notebooks to the page where the relay path had been sketched. A thread through infrastructure too boring to sabotage. Museum networks, university weather stations, a cathedral bell controller that doubled as a time server. "You're sure you can light them?" "I lit them already," he said. "A filament in part 8. Now we feed it until it glows." Her phone, a brick bought by cash, buzzed once in protest at being alive. She silenced it, then stilled. Outside, tires whispered on wet stone and stopped too carefully. She went to the window, lifted a slat a millimeter. "Company," she said. "Not blue lights." He didn't ask how many. He could hear 3 voices and the expensive quiet of men who had trained those voices to stay low. He put a pistol on the table, a little thing that looked embarrassed to be useful, and pushed it toward her. She didn't touch it. "I'll hold the link," she said instead, already dragging the dish's cable to the sash and cracking the window. The mesh unit sang a thin note, found its twin, and locked. On the laptop, the path Ainsworth had drawn came alive, nodes blinking to attention like lighthouses remembering their job. The first shot came as a polite tap through wood, a test of the room's answer. Plaster stunned the air. Evelyn ducked, checked the signal. Solid, for now. "Lestrade?" she asked. "He won't come," Locke said. "He'll be told not to, which is different." Another tap, less polite. The sash above her shoulder spat glass. Something hot brushed her side. She made the sound she'd trained herself not to make and put her hand to it. When it came away slick, she pushed the heel of her palm hard against the fabric and kept the dish aimed. "I can do it," she said, voice steady enough to use. "Just don't let this drop." Locke did not look at the blood. He took the notebooks, the shards, and the kill switch routine and threaded them into the relay path like a wire through a bead. On his screen, clearing systems began to flicker. Not failing, but staggering, like a sleeper turning over. Valkyrie's counterplay declared itself in little deaths, 2 regional payment gateways going read-only, a settlement engine dumping its logs to 5 different countries at once, an old clearinghouse in Frankfurt suddenly deciding it was 1971. "Erasing the history," he said. "If you'd like to destroy proof you exist, first destroy the rooms where proof can be kept." The mesh faltered, noise somewhere banging a door in a way the signal took personally. Evelyn breathed out in sections, recalibrated the dish by a degree, and watched the path resume. Boots on stairs. The door at the end of the hall tried itself and found it couldn't. Whoever had the patience put a shoulder into it. Whoever had the pride let him. "Archie," she said, and it was the first time she used the name that wasn't a theatre. "How much longer?" "Until the last sacristy opens," he said. "Almost." Something moved in the stairwell that carried authority you can't counterfeit. A voice said, "Police, stand fast," in a tone that turned dogs and men into statues. The battering paused, confused that manners had entered the room. The door opened the way doors open when keys are friends, and Lestrade came in like a man who had spent the morning choosing between sin and paperwork, and picked sin for variety. He had 2 uniforms with him and a small, furious smile. "You owe me biscuits," he told Locke, and took the stairwell, turning his coat into a wall. The men without names decided not to contest a stare under police claim. They went for the windows instead, glass hailing down the alley. One clambered to the sill, tidy, methodical. Lestrade's warning shot into the frame convinced him of a different career. Evelyn heard none of it for a moment. The mesh sang clean, the relays opened like dominoes learning how to fall. The kill switch routine presented its final, indifferent line. "Bioanchor. Present?" She looked at Locke. He did not look back. He had already placed his hand on the little reader he had built years ago for a different sin. His pulse climbed under the pad. The system read him the way a sea reads a ship, weight, shape, displacement, and decided to keep the knowledge. Archibald, it wrote somewhere he'd never visit again. Confirmed. The switch executed. Not loudly, not with fireworks. Quiet, like a light going out in a room you didn't realize you were sharing. The counterman slipped along Ainsworth's path, through the bell controller, across the weather station, down a museum's cable tray, and into the custody core of a dozen facilities that had never admitted they were siblings. The AI that had called itself weather met a pressure front it hadn't modelled and collapsed into rain. On Lestrade's radio, someone said a word that sounded like a proper noun becoming a man. Across a collection of desks with different flags on them, a face resolved from pixels. Not mythic, not masked, ordinary, devastatingly ordinary. Evelyn saw the expression on Lestrade's face change shape. He swore once in a way that was almost prayer. "Got you," Locke said very quietly. He didn't smile. The mesh hiccuped as something attempted to pull the path to ground and found only fog. The last readout, a cube farm in Docklands whose lease was a hymn to discretion, came up on 3 screens at once and then went dark between frames. By the time anyone with a badge and a conscience got there, the chairs would be warm and the coffee still lying about its quality. Nothing else. Evelyn let the dish sink, her arm giving up its argument. She sat down the way cliffs sit with dignity. "Hit," Lestrade called without looking. "Through and through," she said. "Soft tissue, annoyed." "Good," he said, and only then did he look, and the coat wall wavered enough to be human. Locke closed the laptop with a motion that had nothing final about it, and everything. On the screen's black he was briefly reflected, a man who existed to the air, but less and less to paper. He touched 2 fingers to Evelyn's shoulder just above the blood, not pressing, just there. "We're done," he said. "We're not," she answered, and nodded at the room beyond the door, at the world beyond the stairwell. "He's still breathing." "Not as a system," Locke said. "As a man, yes." He picked up Ainsworth's notebook, slid it into the biscuit tin with the shards, and shut the lid like a book that knows the end of its story but won't spoil it. Outside, sirens remembered themselves. Inside, the mesh went quiet. On some server that called itself an archive for tax purposes, a log wrote a last line, then refused to admit it had ever been opened. "Right," Lestrade said, holstering the day. "Now would be an excellent time for your vanishing act." Locke glanced at Evelyn. She managed a smile with teeth. "He'll try to erase you. I'll try to keep you written down where it matters." "Where is that?" he asked. She nodded at her own chest. "Here." He looked almost amused. "That is very poor redundancy. Use what you have," she said. Boots again, closer now, friendly this time. Lestrade tilted his head toward a back stair he had no right to know about. "Go," he said, "and never mind whose bones and whose spoon." They went. Behind them, London did what it always does with miracles and disasters. It absorbed them, made room, and carried on as rain found its old paths along the glass. Evelyn slept through the first night as if pulled down by the tide. When she woke, daylight gathered at the edges of a hospital curtain, making small seas that rose and fell with the air conditioning. Her side ached in a way that meant the surgeon had been competent and the bullet had minded its manners. Lestrade sat in the visitor's chair, coat slung over the back, tie loosened until it resembled a truce. He held a paper cup of tea at the stage where it had given up being hot but refused to admit it. "You live," he said. "Professional habit," she answered, and then, "Locke?" Lestrade set the tea down and considered honesty. As far as the NHS, the Home Office, the DVLA, and the cheerful folk at Border Force are concerned, Mr. Archibald Locke was never born, never paid a parking fine, never renewed a passport, never borrowed a book, and certainly never shared an address with a goldfish named Petunia in 2009. "He had a goldfish? I made one up to see if the database would blink," Lestrade said. "It did not. He's gone on paper. Properly gone." He leaned in, lowered his voice, which isn't the same as dead. Evelyn felt it then, the hollow the system had made around Locke, neat as a hole punch. It was a precise violence. The protocol had taken his measure and kept it. "What about Valkyrie?" she asked. A corner of Lestrade's mouth tilted. A name attached to a face attached to an address that had very good coffee and very bad art. By the time anyone knocked, the art was all that remained. "We have accounts frozen, shell companies collapsing like damp meringues, and 6 very pale men in very expensive suits who suddenly can't remember their birthdays." He scratched his jaw. But the man with the ordinary face stepped out of his ordinary flat and never reached the ordinary lift. "So he's breathing," she said, not a question. "For now." Lestrade studied her bandage. "The mess you and your friend made is helping. The banks are stabilizing. People who worry about such things are very pleased at a technical level and very cross at a moral one." He stood. "You're cleared, by the way. The papers will call you sources close to the investigation. Try not to read them." "And you?" she asked. "Are you cleared?" He smiled without showing teeth. "I'm a policeman. We are never cleared. We are simply reassigned." He picked up the cup. "I left biscuits in the nurse's station. Payment on account." He had reached the door when she said, "Inspector." He looked back. "Thank you for the stairwell." "Don't make a habit of thanking me," he said. "It makes the paperwork harder." The next days existed in bullet points, physiotherapy, statements delivered in a room that smelled of dry-cleaned carpet, an interview in which the questions were reasonable and the silences did the damage. When she asked if she could return to her flat, a woman with a badge that meant patience said yes, please, but would she be kind enough to change the locks? At home, London behaved as if nothing had happened. It rained with confidence. Buses shouldered their way through the day. A boy in the next building practiced his trumpet at war with the hours. Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with Ainsworth's notebook and a mug that claimed to be about cats and drew a map of what still existed. Orion vanished in the way professionals do, by being everywhere and nowhere. The underground market in Wapping closed for renovation, which was one word for a flood and new paint. The Tunnels bar reopened as a florist. The coffee improved. From time to time she tested the world for Locke. She dialed a number that returned the politely brutal message, "The person you are calling is not recognized." She ran a search that gave her 3 Archibalds and 8 Locks, none of whom had ever smelt like electricity. She walked past the Victorian door in Marylebone and found that the monks were still good neighbours and that the keyhole had forgotten her. Late one evening, she took the long way home and let herself into the decommissioned printworks in Clerkenwell. The room with the ghost of ink had been tidied to the point of denial. The dish was gone, the cables coiled, the wall patched. On a ledge above the old trunking, someone not neat enough to be Locke had left a single screw. She pocketed it like a relic. A week stitched itself into something like ordinary. The dressing came off. The scar looked opinionated but not unkind. She slept without dreams until the night the city rattled her window with wind and she woke with the sense of being watched. Her phone, new, careful, bought with cash that had briefly stopped being a fiction, showed a message that did not have a sender, a route, or a history. Just a single line, placed in the world like a coin on a rail. The game never truly ends. Until next time. She stared at it until her eyes watered. Then she deleted it. The gesture felt ceremonial, like closing a door quietly. She turned off the phone and slipped Ainsworth's notebook into the lining pocket of her coat, an old habit from a life where coats had to plan for weather. In the morning she walked to the river. The Thames, it was always the Thames in her head now, moved with the purposeful indifference of old water. Tourists photographed bridges that had outlived better men. A gull performed an autopsy on a paper bag. Evelyn stood by the rail and watched the city breathe. Somewhere Valkyrie was choosing another room with worse art. Somewhere Orion was selling a door that looked exactly like a wall. Somewhere Lestrade was inventing a biscuit-based metaphor to survive a meeting. And somewhere, not on paper, not in any register that would pass an audit, a man who liked keys and seams and the high, bright note a system makes when it discovers it is clever, was watching the same river. She didn't turn to look for him. She imagined instead a different seam, a future case bruising the surface long before anyone learned the word for it. She pressed her palm lightly over the scar, felt the drum of her own pulse, and tried on the idea of living with ghosts that aren't gone. When the rain began, it did so without malice, just a decision made at height. Evelyn raised her collar and started walking, the notebook warm against her ribs, the city counting itself around her in seconds that all existed.
This was Dr. Watson and the Aftermath of Ghosts, written by Beryl Coops. I hope you enjoyed my short story. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. I have written over 500 short stories over the years under many pen names. I will be updating these and recording them under the Beryl Coops name. I will be listing them on YouTube as fast as we can get them recorded. They will include historical drama, humor, adventure, romance, period drama, mystery, thriller, war stories, spy stories, revenge, horror, psychological horror, dystopian, disaster, children's stories, love stories, and more. Too many to name. Something for everyone. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up. It helps others find my channel. Until next time, thank you for listening to the end.